So I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about strategic language use. And perhaps the best way to get into this, and there's a fair bit of research on this, is through framing language. And framing here is a metaphor. So you can imagine sort of a picture, and it's surrounded by a frame. Now, how you interpret the picture is affected by the frame that surrounds it. So if it's a very plain frame, you might have a different interpretation than if it's a very ornate and elaborate frame. So framing affects how you see the picture. Now the picture itself doesn't change, just the way in which you're invited to see the subject matter itself. And in talking about framing language, strategic language, I'm not talking about lying or misrepresenting any ideas. I'm talking about deliberately choosing your words. So this is not some sort of Orwellian night is day, black is white, we've always been at war with East Asia sort of thing, but rather I'm talking about finding and highlighting credible commonalities. And so you might think about this as sort of the counterpoint to stasis, where in stasis point you were finding points of clash. Now we're looking to find points of commonality. So you can't ignore, as we talked about last week, you can't ignore those really big stasis points. But nor should you ignore those points of commonality. That seems a really rich area for language development as a way of encouraging agreement with your position. So I would like to think through finding and highlighting credible commonalities by looking for these areas of overlap between topic, speaker, and audience. And the rhetorical theorist Kenneth Burke might call this identification or consubstantiality. And so he's really clearly borrowing from the theological sense of consubstantiality there, but talking about where we share a common substance. And finding these possible commonalities might be easy. The real challenge for you and for that target audience is finding ones that that audience will actually find as credible. And that's sort of key. So let me give you an example of this. So back when I was in graduate school, I got my master's and my PhD at Indiana University. I'm not from Indiana, but that's where I went to grad school. And as someone who had speech and debate background, student elections would run debates. And so I was one of the moderators for those student elections. Now, if you're familiar with elections in general, much less student elections and student campaign tickets can tend to promise a lot more than they actually do. So as a moderator, I typically want to come up, I want to hear hard answers to real questions, not just do you like puppies or stuff like that. So the question I asked when it came to my turn was, here at Indiana University, what can student government not do? And I mean, this is a question to sort of suss out where they are practical, right? Student government can't do a lot of things. I mean, they can't make faculty decisions, they control a budget, and they can make recommendations to the university, but there are some strengths and limitations to student government. So I asked this question, and the different presidential candidates from each ticket would come up, and they would answer the question. The first person gets up there and says, well, we don't have tuition setting authority, so we probably shouldn't be promising anything about that. Second ticket comes up and does pretty much the same spiel. They're talking about what the real reach of student government is. Well, the final presidential ticket guy gets up there, and you can tell this is going to be something different. He's winding up. He's ready. He's going third. He's ready to knock this one out of the park. And he says, well, when I was a boy, man, your sensor should go up when you hear that. But he says, well, when I was a boy, I had just finished playing a baseball game in Little League, and we were driving back home, and it was me and my dad in our truck. And my dad looked over at me, and I was very disappointed that day because we had lost. And he said, son, this is America. And in America, you can do whatever you want and be whatever you want. So then he brings it back, and he says, so when I hear your question, what can student government not do? My answer is nothing. We can do anything that we so choose. The people who supported him loved it. Everybody else is like, what in the heck did this guy just say? I mean, it was clear he had heard a lot of political speeches and said, this is going to be what people love. I'm surprised it wasn't, we were driving in our American-made truck on the way through the cornfields. We were actually eating apple pie as we sat in the cab. We passed Mom, and she threw ice cream at us. I'm surprised it didn't have all that sort of, and then an eagle swooped down, and it kissed us with a gun and said, freedom! So there are all sorts of limitations. But But what was happening there, at least for his target audience, the people who had yet to decide to vote for him, was those were commonalities, ostensibly, but they were not credible. They had nothing to do with the question. They were jammed in, and they felt phony. So the issue is not just finding a potential area of commonality, but is it a credible commonality for this audience on this topic? And that's where this sort of speech writing and strategic language use is fun, but it's also ethical, because you're looking for what are genuinely the commonalities that exist. So I want to talk first to speaker-audience commonalities, and in the next lecture we'll talk about audience-topic commonalities. So first let's talk to what are some of these potential speaker-audience commonalities where you and that audience have some sort of common substance, have some sort of shared identity. And in doing this, you really want to highlight where you and your audience are on the same side. And we did some of this back in the informative speech when we were talking about eunoia, demonstrating that goodwill. But you want to be able to find and build on existing areas of agreement. And a lot of this actually comes from, there's a whole literature on negotiation. So business schools do a lot of this. And there's a well-known book, Roger Fisher and William Ury's Getting to Yes. And in that book, one thing they mention in terms of negotiation is be hard on the problem, but soft on people. Meaning, you and that audience, even if they disagree with you about some ideas about through implementation, they may agree that it's a problem. So you can really rail on the problem because it's something that it doesn't fight back. So you can say on whatever, funding schools. We have to fund these schools better. This is an issue that simply must be addressed. Now, you and I might actually disagree on specifically what needs to be done, but we can certainly agree that this is something that demands our attention. Now, we can quibble over the details, but so you get the idea. You can minimize the disagreements that you have if you're highlighting the agreements that you have in addressing the ill. Okay, now that really works if the ill is a shared, recognized problem, but still you're understanding that you can be hard on the problem, but soft on those who disagree with you. So doing this allows you to show and to at least make evident, because maybe the audience knows in the back of their mind that you have some commonalities, but you're bringing it to the fore. So it really demonstrates, what you and your audience share, what you have in common. So I want to show you a very brief clip of a presidential candidate doing this, because presidential candidates really do want to show a lot of those areas of common interest. And this is a clip from when Barack Obama was running for president for the first time. And in this speech, he goes through this segment of this speech. He goes through and actively talks about potential areas of disagreement as being actual areas of commonality. And I think it's also particularly good for this week because he's doing so through stylistic writing. Okay? So we'll go ahead and take a listen to this and just come back shortly afterwards and talk about what is he doing to highlight the commonalities that exist between him and his audience.
Yes, we can argue and debate our positions passionately. But all of us must summon the strength and grace to bridge our differences and unite in common effort. Black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, Democrat, Republican, young, old, rich, poor, gay, straight, disabled, or not. All of us have to come together. Ohio, in this election, we cannot afford the same political games and tactics that are being used to pit us against one another, to make us afraid of one another. The stakes are too high to divide us by class and region and background, by who we are or what we believe. Because despite what our opponents may claim, there are no real or fake parts of this country. There's no city or town that's more pro-America than anywhere else. We're one nation, all of us proud, all of us patriots. There are patriots who supported this war in Iraq and patriots who opposed it. Patriots who believe in democratic policies and those who believe in Republican policies. The men and women who serve in our battlefields, some may be Democrats, some may be Republicans, others independents, but they fought together and they bled together. And some died together under the same proud flag. They have not served a red America or a blue America. They've served the United States of America.
So in that clip, that brief clip, rarely do you find sort of such a clear laying out of here are areas that might be considered divisions, but in truth they are actually areas of commonality. You know, he's almost going through a demographic checklist. The other thing, and we'll get to this more in the delivery, is listen to how he sort of rides the audience response, right? He builds up that audience response as they're getting louder, they're applauding, then he stops, lets that audience continue to applaud, and then as they're starting, the applause is starting to go down. He doesn't let them get totally silent. They get right around here, and he starts on the next line and starts building them up again. So he's kind of really playing back and forth with that audience in terms of not letting them go totally silent, but not trying to talk over them at their loudest point of applause. So I just kind of want to draw this video to a close by asking you to think about a speech that you're working on right now and going through and identifying just nouns or phrases that could unite you and your audience as a commonality. So if you were doing something on persuasive speech for this audience, for this MOOC audience, you could talk about us as global citizens, as advocates for education, as MOOCers, which actually doesn't sound all that good. That sounds actually kind of bad. But I want you to just think about a speech that you're working on either for this class or for outside of this class and identify nouns that provide a common identity to you and your target audience. So go ahead and do that now, or think about that now, and then we'll talk more about topic audience commonalities in the next video lecture.